So honoured and lucky to have Leith Van Onselen join us every Saturday morning. See what I did there? He's Chief Economist at the NB Fund and NB Super, and he's the man at Macro Business along with David Llewellyn-Smith, who bring us common sense in the coverage of economic and financial matters. Leith, good morning. I hope you're well.
Yeah, I'm well, thanks, Luke. That was a brilliant segue, by the way.
Yeah, well, that's why I'm on the... Oh, no, hang on, I'm not. I was going to say that's why I'm on the big bucks, but I'm not. Yeah, okay. Thanks, mate. The government is saying they're cracking down hard on immigration, and I think all of us, or I think a lot of us, are saying, well, that's smart. You and I have been through this a million times. You know, if you're building not even 200,000 homes a year and you're bringing in more than 500,000 people, do the mathematics. But are they actually? Is it true that they're taking action?
Mate, they say they are, but unfortunately the numbers just keep going up. So the Australian reported this week that Australia's group of 8 universities, so that's your largest and most prestigious universities, have recorded a 17% uptick on overseas enrolments compared to the same time last year. So more record numbers coming in, and that follows the latest Department of Home Affairs data, which showed that Australia's got 670,000 temporary student visas on issue at the moment, which is up 90,000 from last year and a record high. And of course, last week we got the Australian Bureau of Statistics net permanent long-term arrivals data, which posted, record net arrivals. We had 195,000 net permanent long-term arrivals in the first quarter of this year, which again was, record. And that shows that Australia's net overseas migration continues to run at these near record levels. And unfortunately, mate, the blowout on all these visa things is sort of par for the course for this Albanese government. So, since it got elected, it has consistently understated Australia's net overseas migration. So, just as a quick, historical refresher for people out there, when the Albanese government came in, they did their first budget in October 2022, and they said that net overseas migration for the last financial year, so we're talking 2022-2023, was going to be 235,000. Then it came to the May budget last year where they suddenly went, whoops, hang on, it's going to be 400,000. Then the actual data came in from the ABS and ended up being 530,000 last financial year. So, more than double what Labor initially projected.
Yeah.
And then the circus has continued this year, in this year's budget. So the December mid-year economic fiscal update outlook, which they released late last year, projected 375,000 net overseas migration for this current financial year. Then last Tuesday's federal budget revised it up to 395,000. Now we've got all these record numbers coming in, and it shows that net overseas migration is more likely to come in around 500,000. So again, they're going to miss by a mile on the projections they literally released last week. So we've only got another month to go this financial year, and they're going to probably be out by at least 100,000.
That's amazing. And when the Treasurer gets up to on his feet, when he hands down the budget that Tuesday night in May, and he talks about Treasury projections, he was big on inflation and how the Treasury numbers were different to the RBA's numbers because Treasury knew what the budget was all about. And I'm sitting, I don't care if the Treasurer is of the left or of the right, but when they get up and say, hey, Treasury said, I go, right, well, now we know what won't happen. You're around this a whole lot closer than I am. Do you feel that? Do you think Treasury forecasts, projections always seem to be out?
Yeah, absolutely, and it's pretty much the fit of narrative. So, again, I'll refer back to last year's federal budget. So, literally, it came out in May last year. It said we're going to have 400,000 net overseas migration, and then the actual official data, which only covered one more month in the year, came out and it said we had 530. Like, that's a miss of 130,000 net overseas migration.
Yeah.
And then this year we're going to miss probably by about 100,000 again. So It does make you wonder. And the hilarious thing about this, Luke, is that Jim Chalmers said that the lower inflation profile that Treasury is projecting, so it's 2.6% inflation by the end of next year is what they projected by memory in the federal budget. He predicated that on the fact that net overseas migration is going to fall to the budget's forecast. And so he said that basically because we're going to have lower immigration, we're going to have lower inflation, which is a tacit acknowledgement that immigration is one of the drivers of our inflation problem, most notably through the rental market. Yeah. So effectively, if they don't meet their migration forecasts, which they're already, running way ahead of, given this current data, they're probably not going to meet their inflation forecasts, and it's just, it's just diabolical. That's all I can say.
Yeah, the media coverage of all of this has been somewhat predictable, hasn't it? I see in the Fin Review they're talking about what the reduction of international student numbers will mean to the economy. I mean, successive governments, I have to say, have almost subcontracted out our immigration department to these universities who were relying on government support. That support fell over time and they thought, right, now how do we keep getting the same money? Oh, I know. And we're meant to be proud of all of this. At the same time, they didn't, from what I know, they have not contributed to infrastructure or anything like that. In fact, they've contributed to the problems, including rental. And of course, now we've got the predictable bodies saying, it's only 3% or 4% or 5% or whatever it is. It's astonishing, isn't it? When the people continue to say, don't they, Leith? We just want the numbers to be sensible. But no one's saying, we don't want immigration. No one's saying that. We just want it manageable. And so that people living here now, working here now, needing a hospital or a school or a house or whatever, have some, ability to buy stuff they can afford. That's what this is all about.
Yeah, look, it's been absolutely extraordinary watching this, but also predictable, as you said. So we've had, the last week, ever since Peter Dutton got up and said he's going to reduce the permanent migrant intake to 140,000 for 2 years, which, let me add, that is just simply going back to 2006 levels. And before this whole Big Australia, population Ponzi kicked off in the mid-2000s. So in 2004, we only had 100,000 permanent migrants and about 100,000 net overseas migrants. So it's still above that level. It's still very generous. It's still high from historical perspectives. But suddenly we've had the leftist media talking about the ABC, the Guardian, the New Daily, all the usual suspects, the pro-migration think tanks, the business lobby, the higher education lobby, the property lobby, and Labor all slam Dutton's immigration cuts. So we've got this sort of strange bedfellows between the left and right who've come in and basically said that this is going to be disastrous. It's going to destroy the economy. It's going to, increase skills shortages, destroy the federal budget, endanger the international education exports, which is a fudged figure, by the way. All their arguments are nonsensical. So if you want to take one at a time, yes, it'll lower economic growth. Of course it will. Less people means less economic growth, but it's not going to harm per capita growth, which is what we should care about. And the fact that Australia's per capita growth performance in the last 15 to 20 years has been terrible while I've run this Big Australia policy tells you that it doesn't improve individual living standards. Then they argue it's going to increase skills shortages. Well, Australia's increased its population by 8.2 million people this century by running a huge immigration program, and yet we've got worse skills shortages than ever. And that's because we run a it's because we run a whack-a-mole migration system. So we try and plug skills shortages in certain areas and we just create them in other areas. And I've used this example before. Sure, we could import 1 million builders to try and, overcome the skills shortages in building. But then you're just going to create shortages in healthcare and all these other areas because those people who come in will need those things.
They'll need a doctor, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. And then suddenly the solution will be, okay, we need to get all those people in. So then you import them in and then you end up at the end of it coming back to a building shortage.
Yeah.
Because you've just grown everything and then those people demand things in other areas and then that creates shortages there. It's just ridiculous. And the fact that we've grown the population at its fastest ever pace, 8.2 million people so far this century, and we've got worse skills shortages than ever, this tells you it does not work.
Yeah.
And then they run the argument it's going to destroy the federal budget. Well, yes, the federal budget collects 80% of the nation's tax revenues. And they're only looking at one side of the equation, which is the revenue side. They don't look at the cost side, which is all the infrastructure that's required. And there's analysis out there that says that each extra resident requires $130,000 worth of infrastructure investment over their lifetime. Extra infrastructure investment. That's a cost. They don't account for that cost. They don't account for the cost on state budgets because the feds get all the benefit. They collect 80% of tax revenue. The costs then fall on the state and local governments, who then end up with massive debt, as we're seeing in New South Wales, Victoria, and all these other places. They don't count that. And then they argue it's going to endanger the international education exports. Well, Luke, that 40 billion figure that you hear is completely made up. Now, I'll tell you why it's made up. because the Australian Bureau of Statistics, and this has been proven, counts any dollar of expenditure by an international student, and a lot of that expenditure is estimated. They count any expenditure by a student as an export, even if that money is earned here. So we know that, you know, most international students come to Australia not with a lot of money. They end up working in Australia. They take jobs in Australia, and then they spend that money on tuition, living expenses, etc. Every single dollar of that expenditure, the ABS wrongly counts as an export.
So let me ask you this. You've got an international student who does some part-time work, and he or she then goes and buys a 6-pack of dunny paper. Are you telling me
That's an export?
That's an export? Well,
Yes,
well, that's the
that
best
is the way
ever.
the ABS. It is the biggest fraud I've ever seen in statistics, and yet that is held up. And so that is why you hear that international education is Australia's third biggest export, or whatever the ridiculous figure they put out there, and it makes the industry sound a lot more important than it actually is. And really, what happens is, so, you know, most of our students come from poor nations, right? They come from, you know, South Asia, Africa, etc.
Yeah.
Those students don't come here with a lot of money. They come over here, they end up working, right? And we've seen a lot of students not really being genuine students. They're really just coming here to work. Any dollar they earn and then spend in the economy, the spending there is counted 100% as an export by the ABS. It's a joke, right? So an export, you know, most normal people think an export is overseas money that comes into Australia. So the money's derived from elsewhere. So, for example, a tourist from America comes here, they fly to Australia, they spend a whole bunch of money which they've earned in America, then they fly home. And that money they spend here is export money. With students, we import the people, right? They require housing and everything else. They work here, and that money that they then spend from working here is then counted as an export.
Joke.
It's a joke.
It's a joke. Thank you, mate. Have a great weekend. Talk to you next week.
Yeah, thanks, Luke.
Thank you. Leith Van Onselen, macrobusiness.com.au.